Okay. Please, also the one that are following online, please go to www.menti.com and read the question, the sentence, and please answer by using this code 70627801. Thank you. I will do to check if it works. I think you're allowed to answer only once. I don't remember if I allow, but please answer only once. Okay, now see what happens. Oh, but the code, oh, okay, because I want to check the result. Okay. I cannot go in the website. I don't know why. This one? Okay, yes. Okay, here are the results. 14 so far partially agree, and 4 partially disagree, and 5 totally disagree, and 1 I totally agree. Okay, who is this one? And we will come back. We will come back to this later in the last part of the talk. Okay, now I can start my talk. No, there was another presentation open somewhere. Okay, thank you. Presentation here. Yes. Okay. Okay, economics has a lot to do with procurement, at least 4 Nobel laureates in economics for contribution relevant to public procurement. The first one is Vickrey for his famous Vickrey auction, which is a second lowest price auction or second highest price depending on the application. And it is used by eBay. When you buy something on eBay, you pay the second highest price and not the highest price. So this gives you an incentive to bet a higher price. And the same can be applied when you buy, when the government buys. The second Nobel Prize is Jean Tirole, that with Jean-Jacques Lafon work on the theory of incentive in procurement and regulation. Most about regulation, but also some concept about procurement they developed. And the third one is the last Nobel Prize we got last year, Paul Milgrom and Robert Wilson, for improvements to auction theory and invention of new auction formats. And in particular, they were concerned with the winner's curse. So sometimes you win, a firm participate to a tendering procedure, offer a very low price, win, but then, as Martin said, they go bankrupt. So this is not a good thing for the firm, of course, but not also for the procurement agency. Okay, so they were studying this aspect of the winner's curse. Economic theory, applies not in all parts of the procurement phases. Here there is planning, tender, award, contract implementation. I just list some issues where economics is important. Of course, market studies at the beginning before deciding what to procure and how to do that. And so demand analysis, supply analysis, market structure that help to understand how many competitors potentially are interested. And so if we have an oligopoly and if we have to fear about collusion or we are sure that competition is there and so we shouldn't worry. Another issue at the really planning stage is if centralized procurement or decentralized procurement, at which degree centralized or decentralized. Talking about the award, the tender, of course, there is all the literature that studies, especially when you go not for the lowest price, but for the most economically advantaged tender, in techniques to put a weight to the financial score and put a weight to the technical score. And also which type of auction. We have seen in this morning that the rule, they have different possibilities. And so if you go for a framework agreement, dynamic auction in procurement, or if you go for a sealed bid auction, okay? I just give you number of lots, reference price. I just give you a couple of examples later on. Talking about market structures, of course, economists like perfect competition. If there is perfect competition, it's plenty of firms. So, especially if the good is standardized, such as in perfect competition, so we shouldn't worry too much. If there is a monopoly, it's the other extreme of the market structure, only one firm, you go for concessions, so you give the contract to only one firm, and it's the only firm that can participate. So we talk about competition for the market, not competition into the market. The most typical and most worrying also situation is oligopoly. When you have a few firms, they know each other, they interact, and so the key problem is to devise the tendering procedures so as to reduce the problem of collusion, cartels, bid rigging. Collusion. A part of economic theory, I study a lot the factors that make it easy or more difficult to collude and how to deal with these problems. Of course, if there are few firms, collusion is a problem, and contracting authorities can work on the optimal decision of the size of lots. Of course, if you decide for a single lot, which is very big, you should expect higher and fierce competition. If you have two firms participating and you have two lots, it is very likely that this firm find a way to divide the lot one by one. And also the aspect of technical requirements, because if they are too strict, you reduce probably the number of firms that want to participate. Other aspects are symmetry. If the firms are similar, it is more likely that they collude. If you have big firms and small firms, maybe a small firm can break a kind of collusive agreement that was running by a big firm that were participating until last year, until last tender. If interactions are frequent, so as we said a few minutes ago, we need data, and you can also get data from previous tender in other countries. And then you see that if interactions are frequent, it is very likely that collusion is there, because today I win the contract and tomorrow you let me win the contract, and in 2 years' time you will win again. If the contract is for 3 years, it is more difficult to collude. Of course, we talk about SMEs, and 2 ESR projects are about SMEs and disadvantaged groups, and this has to do with barriers to entry. And so when you devise a tendering procedure such that maybe not voluntarily, but it ends up with some barriers to entry, you reduce the number of firms, and you come back to the issue of the low number of firms. I try to change the microphone, maybe. the same. Other aspects are innovation. So if the good is very complex, it is more difficult to collude. If the good is standardized, is quite easy to collude. And another aspect that can be measured and has been measured is the issue of multi-market contact. The same firm participate in different regions of the country, in different country, in similar tendering procedure for different products, and they are active in these products. So in this case, it is very easy that they collude. There is research that suggests to use analysis of past standard to see what happened in the past and to see if multi-market contact help to firms to collude. And then there is the big issue of uncertainty, information, perfect information or imperfect information, and also transparency. This morning, transparency has been repeated several times, but it was a transparency of the tendering notice. When we talk about transparency here, we intend transparency of everything in the procurement process. So, for example, you know all the, each firm know all the bids of the other firm, know all the details, and this for economics, even if it's strange, has been proved to help collusion. So transparency is good to avoid corruption, but sometimes it is not so good a full transparency in terms of collusion, because we need some sort of secrecy such that the firm don't know each other, and when they participate to the tendering procedure, they even if they try to agree with the rival, maybe they don't trust the rival, and so maybe at the end they compete aggressively anyway. Okay, so this is what, just in a nutshell, what economic theory says about collusion. Just 3 examples, as I said, 2 are from practical stories of what happened and how economics is important. Hong Kong Transport Department was replacing conventional traffic lights with LED traffic lights. And they were making a market analysis. At the beginning, they were estimating a value of 18 million, above the threshold, I guess, for Hong Kong. And then after a couple of years, because it took time to make this project, they realized that there was fast technological progress going on. And so at the end, they end up spending 50%. So this has to do with a correct choice of the reference price. Here, there is a demand-supply simple analysis. The demand is the negative slope curve. If the price is high, you buy less. If the price is low, you buy more. So you have a quantity on the horizontal axis and a price on the vertical axis. And the supply function is the positively sloped function, which means that if the price is high, the firm would like to sell more of this product. Okay, so what happens if there is technological progress? It happens that the supply function shifts from the supply to the new supply, and it happens that the equilibrium price goes from P0 to P1. Okay, so you need to perform a market analysis in a correct way in order to select the reference price, because sometimes reference price are selected in a wrong way, and this of course doesn't bring what we said this morning, value for money and a correct price. Okay, so this was one example. The other example, I don't have too much time, but I leave you the slides, is how to do a market analysis that includes also interaction between the rivals. So in a way, the contracting authority must think as if, must put in the shoes of the rivals, so of the firms, and so in order to devise, in this case, if deciding to go for one single lot or 2 lots, because before making this decision, the contracting agency should think as if it is a firm, it is the seller and not the buyer. Okay, in this case, which is theoretical, you have to purchase foodstuff and to deliver to school refectories, and you know that there are only 2 firms willing to provide this service to you, A and B. Firm A has cost equal to 8 in north and 12 in south. So Firm B is more efficient in north and less efficient in south for several reasons. And you know also that firm B instead is more efficient in north and less efficient in south because it has a cost equal to 9 in north and 10 for south. You know everything as a contracting agency, and firm A know the cost of firm B, and firm B know the cost of firm A. So it's perfect knowledge. And your decision is you choose one single lot or two lots in this case. Of course, if you are free to negotiate directly with the firm, the best you can do is to give the contract directly to firm A in north at a price equal to 8, and to firm B in the south at a price equal to 10. And so you end up by spending 18. Okay, here there are questions. The answer are the red numbers. Okay, so what would be the expected expenditure of the contracting authority if the first best option is available? Of course, 18. But this is against the rule because you have to go for an open procedure, a tendering procedure, and so 18 is just a mirage. Okay, you know that you will end up spending more than 18, and you can do anything about that. Okay, the only thing that you have to decide is to go for one single lot or two lots. If you go for one single lot, now you have to sum the prices, the costs. So firm A has a total cost for the entire country of 20, and firm B has a total cost of 19. So you should expect that firm B win at a price equal to 19.9, close to 20, but below 20. If you really organize well your tendering procedure, you give some profit to firm B because you cannot avoid this. But the best that you can do is expecting to spend 20. If you go for two lots, in this case, firm A probably will win in north at a price slightly less than 9, because the most efficient one. It can offer 8, but it's not. Some of you that are not economists didn't make game theory. We say, why not offering 8? It's possible to offer 8, but it's also possible to offer 8.9, and so you get more. Okay, so virtually 9. Firm A will win in north, and firm B will win in south at a price virtually equal to 12. So you end up by spending 21. So if you do all this reasoning in a correct way, you should go for one single lot. Then if you go for one single lot and you realize that you spend 25, then you have to ask yourself what happened. Maybe there is collusion, maybe something went wrong. Okay, so but this is how economic reasoning, in this case the use of game theory, help us to understand how firms should interact in a real world context. The third example, Roberto is not here, but it's again Germany, I'm sorry. It's an auction for the, in this case, the government was selling, not buying, the radio spectrum for GSM second generation frequencies. 10 lots. So the German government decided to go for 10 lots and with a simultaneous increases offer auction. Okay, so you could outbid the rival, and there were several stages. There were only two incumbents, Mannesmann and T-Mobile. And the first offer, Mannesmann was offering 18.18 million for lot 1.5 and 20 for lot 6 and 10. And this is strange kind of offer. There are 10 lots. Why offer a different price for different lots? And why 5.5 and why with 18, 18 and 20? This was a clear message that Mannesmann was trying to give to T-Mobile by saying, hey, let's divide 5 lot each. And let's divide 5 lot each exactly at the price equal to 20. Because the contracting authority decided that each subsequent offers should have been 10% more at least. And if you add 10% to 18.18, you get exactly 20. Okay, so this is not overt collusion. This is the antitrust authority evaluated the case, and there were no proof that it was implicit collusion. So this was perfectly legal, but of course was not competitive, because at the end the government got 20 million for 5 lots and 20 million for another 5 lots. And this kind of auctions were running all over the European countries at that time. Then we have other auctions for UMTS technology, and we will have for 5G technology, et cetera, et cetera. For example, in the UK, because they were using experts in mathematics and in game theory, they were devising in a better way the auction, and they were getting much more for this type of competition. So these are just 3 examples of how economics has to do in different phases of the procurement process. Okay, yes?
Rescue on the account of the lawyers, because I don't get much, I'll be honest. So Davide, if you could just translate that from yours to mine, is that ultimately meaning that the risk is that if we don't have economists involved, that us as, let's say, lawyers or public servant, we wouldn't notice this as issues? You know, this pro-collusive behavior?
What economists would say is that if you have you think that there are 3-4 firms participated, choose at least a number of lots which is greater than that. But in this case, you have 2 firms and you got for 10 lots, and then you let this firm interact so they learn each other. If it was a sealed bid, this couldn't have happened. Because in sealed bid, there is not this 18-18. So maybe they would offer 25 for 10 lots or 26, we don't know. But in this case, you leave room for them to collude and exploit that. Perfectly legal. But we already said this morning, each time that you set some rules, the firms try a clever way to circumvent the rule. And also in this case, this increase of 10% was maybe try to avoiding 1% increase, 1% increase, 1% increase. But in this case was a good instrument for firms. Okay. This is a typical case in an auction of non-common value. You don't know, it's a common value, but it is unknown, because when you buy a radio spectrum and when you buy the right to exploit the sea if there is oil, in this case there is a lot of uncertainty. So we don't really know if 20 million is the correct price, and if 60 million that were paid in the UK or 50 in Italy was too much a high price. In this case, we really don't have the value. We know that there is a value for this radio spectrum. In fact, in some countries, telephone company complained by saying, hey, my colleague in Germany, they paid much less for having this right to connect millions of people or citizens through this technology. Okay, so in sometimes the example we made before about the reference price, in that case, the reference price should be connected to the market price. But in this case, there is really uncertainty about the true value of what we are buying, or what the government is selling and what the firm is buying. Okay, we like perfect competition in general, but perfect competition sometimes doesn't happen because there are the so-called market failures. There are a lot of market failures. The first one is scale economies. So in this case, if there are huge scale economies, you end up with only one firm. Sometimes you call it natural monopoly, so you give the concession for the delivery of water in your town, or train transport, or so in this case, we come back to what we said before, is competition for the market and not in the market. Sometimes, if the firms are free to operate, they create externalities that are positive or negative. The positive externalities, for example, a firm innovate, another firm imitate, and so they innovate later, and so there is an upscale of innovation, which is good, a side effect of competition. But sometimes it is, for example, pollution. And so a firm pollutes, and they want to produce at a very low price, and so they decide some technique that are not environmental friendly. So in this case, the government should intervene, and of course there is room for the procurement also agencies to try to devise procedure that stimulate innovation, so procurement for innovation, or they try to avoid as much as they can environmental damages. So SAPIENS has a lot to do with this externality part, try to reduce the negative effect of externality and produce as much as they can the positive effect of externalities. The other problem why the market doesn't work is, in the example we made, the information was perfect, everybody was knowing everything, but in the real world, there is a lot of asymmetric information, so the contracting authority doesn't know the characteristic of the firm don't know each other, and so this creates problems and problems. Typically, there are problems of adverse selection when you select the wrong guy, basically, so you give the contract to the wrong guy because this wrong guy didn't have, didn't give you all the information that was required in order to do a correct choice. And sometimes it is a good guy on paper, but then he behaves, after you give the contract, he behaves in an incorrect way, moral hazard, for example, by reducing the quality that he promised or by reducing the effort, if we talk about consultancies, for example. When you select a consultant, the consultant maybe is the best consultant in the world, but then he can work not so good in this project because he prefers to spend his time in other projects. So market failures reduce efficiency and increase the need of government intervention in order, there are several ways, for example, technical requirements, guarantees, audits are all ways try to reduce this problem of adverse selection and moral hazard. And typically in public procurement, there is everything of these aspects. Ex-ante asymmetric information coupled with moral hazard plus uncertainty and risk issues. And these complicate the stuff sometimes at the very high levels. This is just very quick, in a nutshell, what is my reading of how economics contributes to the public procurement discipline. But I want to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes of my speech talking about empirical research. Because Roberto, before going away, was saying that we need data, and once we get data, we need to do some sound empirical analysis with this data. Try to contribute to some parts of the procurement discipline. How to do high-quality research in economics? Finer is the word. Identify a relevant, original, and hopefully feasible in 3 years research question. Sometimes it takes 10 years to do a good research analysis, but it's not good for a PhD, of course. So feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. Typical issues in economics are the effect of a reform. And so look for reforms in Chile, in some African countries, and then you can apply economic analysis in order to have a research that you can give an answer. Sometimes, what are the effects of demand-supply shock? In the case of public procurement, the effects on what? On prices, sure. On delays, on cost overruns, on innovation, for example, on growth of the firm, growth of the country, for example. There are some papers that look at the growth of the country, so at a very broad and general level. The effect of a demand-supply shock or reform on the number of bids that you get, and also on the supplier selection. So on the proportion, for example, women-owned business that win contract, or proportion of minority firms with minority managers, with minority CEOs that win a contract, etc. So look for good data, which is part of the problem, but then find a sound identification strategy. So you need to do econometrics and statistical analysis. And in a few examples I will give you in the next few minutes, some example of statistical tools that are used are different analysis, instrumental variable, discontinuity design. I will comment on this later on. So I have selected 3 or 4 areas of research in public procurement. The first one is in centralization. So what are the effects of centralization as compared to decentralization? There is a paper that I did with a colleague, Simona Baldi, and also other group, Ferraresi, Guicciardo, Rizzo, were working on the health sector. The idea is to see if centralization has effects in the health sector. In my case, on the price of drugs, effects of reducing the price of drugs at which the government buys drugs. In the case of Ferraresi and others, in per capita local health expenditure. And we both found that centralization seems to work in the context of the health sector. In particular, talking about methodology, I was using very easy methodology, not at the frontier, but Ferraresi et al. Use a reform that was introduced in central purchasing bodies, and were using difference in these techniques. So they were using a treated sample of firms that were subject to the reform, and the sample of firms that were not subject to, or central agency that were not subject to the reform, and we're trying to see which is the effect of the reform. All the papers are in the reference at the end of the presentation. Chiappinelli, always concentrating on centralization. We're using TED, Tenders Electronic Daily. Of course, is an EU data set worth to explore. And for 2016-17, there is also information for SMEs to study the impact of centralization in the case of works, so not health sector anymore, but works. She finds that partial centralization is beneficial, not always, especially when procurement offers are competent, and they measure competence by looking at literacy of procurement officers, so they had data on the literacy of procurement officers, and are also incentivized. In before the launch, there was this example of how to avoid corruption, and one idea is to give incentives to procurement managers. In that case, they get money for how good they do their job and not from bribes. So this is one thing that comes to mind to me. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you can we were saying this before. You are an hospital. You can buy drugs on your own. You can create a consortium of hospitals, and this is partial centralization. You can delegate the buying to the regional agency. So this is a even higher centralization, or you leave the central purchasing body of the government to buy it. So you can set a different level of centralization. I comment on 10, 15 papers. I don't remember all the details of the paper. So in that case, I really don't, it's work contract, so yeah. Yeah, this is econometrics. You need to take a course in econometrics. That most of the literature that you found that you find is about correlation, and so you don't go too far, because you can know you are not able to know if a reform had an effect or not. It's just correlated. Could be several other reasons why. You have to use some. We will come back to a couple of examples of how you can identify really a causal relationship. Okay. Centralization is good for these 3 papers on the health sector and works, but De Carolis finds in another empirical paper that contract authorities react to centralization in a distorting way. First, by anticipating some purchases before the reform enters into place, okay, but this is just a short-term effect. Then by reducing, manipulating the size of lot and before my presentation, there was this idea that prohibits to split the contract, but there are still room to split the contracts and circumvent this type of EU rule. So if the threshold is 10,000, you have 3 lots of 3,000, and you are done. And this is not the firm, it's on the part of central authority, of contracting authorities. And the third reaction is you aggregated the smallest type, so you do partial centralization, not full centralization. And what it is important about this paper, at least to me, is that this distortion partially offset the potential benefit of the centralization reform. So you do a reform, political will is to do a reform, and then the procurement officers runs against the reform sometimes. Yeah.
A question of the chat is, what is meant as a literacy measure? Is it
if you have a master, if you have a high degree, if you have just a low-level degree, yeah, how literate you are. And then there are also, sometimes there are surveys in which you are asked to answer some question, for example, financial literacy, and then depending on how if you answer correctly or not, you are literate or not.
And the second question is, you mentioning that the centralization works, at least partial, but it's not clear what you mean in the context of cost savings that it works, or in what sense that it works, from which perspective?
Cost savings.
Well, it's about the comment that you made, that the centralization works, right? Sort of from which perspective?
I think it's cost savings, yeah, I think it's cost savings. Again, competence of procurement officers. The most famous paper in economics is still Bandiera Prat Valletti in American Economic Review, which is the top journal in economics. And they find that when a contracting authority pays a higher price, it is not too much because there is corruption, but it is because there is inefficiency, what they call passive waste. But one says to think that this is really the case. The other is to demonstrate, again, with econometric techniques. The key idea is that they use, again, a reform that allow, but not oblige to, the contracting authority to go for centralization. So their intuition is that if you decide to centralize, it is probably because you realize that you are inefficient, you delegate the power to the central agency, and not because you are corrupt. Because if you are corrupt, you try to keep in-house the activity. So exploiting this idea, they measure exactly that 80% of the inefficiency is due, of the higher cost, the higher price is due to passive waste, and only 20% to active waste. So corruption is a huge problem, but having a non-competent procurement officer is even a bigger problem. Okay, if you have a limited resource, you should decide to fight corruption or to try to improve the efficiency of the procurement agencies. De Carolis et others were using another very intelligent way to disentangle an effect, again talking about competence. In this case was competence of the bureau, not of the single procurement officer. And they were exploiting the death of a bureau manager. The death is a shock, and as economists, as empirical economists, we like a shock because it's really exogenous. So you cannot say that he was dying by purpose. He died, but he left the bureau in a problem, in a trouble. And what they find is that by selecting, using another technique that an instrumental variable, don't have time to describe it, they find that when there is a death of a relevant manager, in the 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later, there are increase in delays, cost overruns, and number of negotiations. So the office reduces its efficiency. And this is another test important of how competence is important for the efficiency of the procurement agency. Okay, this paper were about the effects on the price, what are the effect of centralization on the price, the effect of the competence on delays, cost overruns. But there are some research that look at the effect for the firms participating to the tendering procedure. For example, Valtra and others exploit a firm that was given more discretion again to central authorities by raising the threshold below which they can use negotiated procedure. And they found that giving more discretion increases the share of contract given to firm with political connection and decreases the performance of the winning firm. They use again a different technique by dividing a group of treated firms that were subject to the reform and other firms that were not subject to the reform. Even more importantly to me, this paper by Ferraz and others that use data on e-procurement auction in Brazil for very standardized good. In this case, there was a random ending time. So you don't know when the auction ends. It can end in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So who wins is really at random. He wins because by chance, at least partially because of chance, is the last one offering a price before the auction ends. So this is really an exogenous demand shock. Again, it's exogenous. And if you want to study an effect of winning a contract, this is the best we can do to see the true effect. You win a contract, what happens to you? They found that firms that win a contract and increase the chance of winning in the future. So there is learning by doing in terms of firms that work with the government. And there is also, of course, increase in the size of firms that work with the government and by chance were winning this type of contract. In this case, the size was measured by the number of workers. There are other measures of size of the firm. So this is really the quasi-experimental design that we always look for, but it's very rare. There are similar papers for Korea and Ecuador where there is no ending time, no clear random ending time. Okay, I haven't seen paper that are using this methodology. Another paper talking about the effects of firms. Sanfilippo, by the way, is a colleague from this university, so working in this building, use data on 7,000 firms in 19 sub-Saharan African countries, and find that if they sell to the government, the productivity of firms increase. So the effect is an increase in productivity, especially domestic firms, especially SMEs, and especially firms active in manufacturing industries. If you are interested, you can have a look at these papers that study the effects for the firm that work with the government under several aspects. And now we come the last minutes to the SAPIENS project. So the issue of minorities, the issue of gender, the issue of green public procurement. This paper is not an empirical study that tries to answer research questions, but offers some information. Okay, Fazekas et al. Match TED data on tenders with data on firms and try to offer descriptive of the gender gap in public procurement. We know that there is a gender gap in economics, so few female managers in firms, few CEOs females, a few female in the board of directors. But what they found is that in public procurement, it is even higher, the gender gap. So how do they measure this? They use machine learning methods because they have two data sets. One is for the firm, so there is the name of the firm, the fiscal code of the firm, and then there is the TED, the Tender Electronic Daily, which not define the firm exactly in the same way. So they cannot make a one-by-one match 100% by matching the fiscal code, for example. So they had to use machine learning method to identify most likely matches for company names and addresses in the TED dataset. First. So second, they use Python software, gender guesser, to guess the gender of the manager, because in Italy, Maria is male, female, and Andrea is male, female, in Germany, for example. So they have to use a Python software in order to guess the gender. After they did that, they find that the gender gap in public procurement is higher than the gender gap in the economies. So there is room for gender-based public procurement policies. Programs reforms, in this case, programs that try to increase the share of contract given to women-owned small business in the United States. Orser and other were looking at this set-aside program, the effects on the frequency of bid, the effect on the probability of winning a contract, and unfortunately, they found not significant results. So we have to fight this type of result, which is not very encouraging, and maybe other papers that will find a positive result, but this paper didn't find a positive result of these set-aside policies programs. Other similar programs are in Nigeria, South Africa, Norway, and Chile. I think that there is more research for us, for you, in this area, because I didn't see that much in the literature. Maybe I skipped some paper, but there is really few papers on that. More on SMEs. Similar programs for SMEs in Russia, the US, the EU, and so the ones that are working on SMEs, they find more literature. Not much, as I said, not encouraging the research in this area. As to implementation in practice, so how much is implemented public procurement, sustainable public procurement in really tender notice? Grandia and Cruyen offer some interesting descriptive from Belgium. Again, they use text mining techniques and they analyze 140,000 Belgian public procurement notice. So a good idea could be to extend to the entire EU this type of analysis. And what they found is that 65,000, so 30–40%, include some sustainability criteria or something connected to sustainability in the tender notice. And the most popular one is environmental friendly procurement, followed by ethical trade and social return on investment. But this is not very high number because sometimes you put in the notice these aspects, but these are not really relevant aspects. Okay, so you have to reduce the weight of these 65,000 notices that include sustainability aspects in the notice. And here is the problem. Come back to the question I was asking you. That sentence comes from a Nobel Prize in economics. So, entrusting the public procurement system with the task of achieving social, environmental, innovation-related objective is ineffective. This is a very rough judgment, but it comes from Jean Tirole, which is a Nobel laureate for economics, and that with Saussure were working for the government, French government, and were suggesting this. So this is a challenge for Sapiens, I think. But something was said also by Martin in the first presentation. Then we have a couple of Swedish scholars that specifically on green public procurement were rather skeptical about the effects on the environment and on the behavior of firm of green green procurement. In some paper, they offer some theoretical consideration. In other paper, one for cleaning service in Sweden, they find the suppliers react to green public procurement by reducing the participation, by reducing the number of bids. And the overall conclusion is that if you want to improve the environment, maybe go for environmental taxes, go for tradable permits, go for subsidies, because the idea is that they apply to all firms, not only to the winning firms, and are a more effective way in transforming brown supplier into green supplier. So they don't say that the green public procurement doesn't work, is not effective. It is less effective than other policies. Okay, so if you can select policy A, B, C, and D, and you should look the most effective one. So this is another challenging result only for Sweden so far, I found. And what are further issues that are against the green public procurement? That the policies are costly, increasing the paper, increasing the regulation, and this brings inefficiency. And then you have an upward effect on prices, we said this morning. And then sometimes firms do this type of greenwashing strategies that they pretend they are green, but they are not so green. They remain partially brown. So this is, fortunately, empirical research is rather scant because Tirol, gives a sentence, but it doesn't have empirical analysis support of this. These scholars from Sweden, they present empirical papers for Sweden and for cleaning services. But I think that part of this project should improve with empirical analysis this area. An exception is the intersection between green public procurement and innovation. So not the effect on the environment, but effect on the innovation. But Professor Quattraro is giving a talk and is including this paper, so I don't want to comment it now. So what is the conclusion of my short talk that I divided into some theory and where economics is, what topics the economics have touched about the procurement area, and empirical analysis. So do not take for granted that using PPE for industrial, environmental, social innovation practice is generally accepted practice. And there is a lot of skepticism. Good data are available and ready to be used. So time must be spent for looking for good data. And once you have this, you can do your PhD dissertation successfully because this data have not been used so far, etc., etc. And use, of course, state-of-the-art, if you do a PhD economics, of course, state-of-the-art frontier empirical methods. Sapiens project can be of much help in filling a lot of gaps in the empirical economics literature. So we are in the right place, and I'm really curious to see your project on Thursday and Friday. Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, we need to wrap it up. Grab Davide actually on your way to the coffee place. Yeah. I would suggest we have 12 minutes break. So I kindly ask you, literally go pick up what you need, come back. You can stand in the room, you can even walk around the room, but let's try to start on time so we